So tell me, has the frozen conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan become a hot conflict that is turning into a regional geopolitical threat? Welcome to my third YouTube on Nagorno-Karabakh. Today, in number 3, I'd like to look ever so briefly at a conflict that is not only pitting warring parties against each other, but also of very conflictual narratives, let alone of the deployment of frightening weapons such as UAVs or loitering ammunition and electronic warfare. Now, what made me think of number 3 today? Well, 2 reasons really. The first was an article, a piece written by a friend, an Armenian Lebanese friend, on the importance, the centrality of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh in Armenian, to his life. It was a moving piece. It was a piece that showed how Armenians are attached to these lands, but it was also a personal story. It was basically saying why he was so attached to Nagorno-Karabakh and why he thought that that enclave should stay with Armenians. But the second reason why I thought of this number 3 is because I also received a release from the NGO Crisis Action, in which it informed us that they are currently consulting partners and experts on a proposal that pushes France and Germany to champion the ceasefire, whatever there is of it at this stage, and push for accountability mechanisms that mitigate civilian harm. Crisis Action also wanted pressure exerted upon Russia and Turkey to work positively together to maintain this ceasefire. So those 2 little items produced number 3. But if you really want an appreciation of the contours of this conflict, you, the viewer, largely European, largely non-Armenian and non-Azerbaijani, you really have to do some research. I can't do it for you in 15, 16 minutes. What I would suggest is to leave you with some food for thought, to sow a few seeds in this number 3. Look at numbers 1 and 2 that are already posted on YouTube, and this number 3, and then try to start with the 1980s and turn the decades like you would the pages of a history book. And you would come undoubtedly across names that have marked, I would say that have scarred, the psychology of Armenians and Azerbaijanis at one stage or another from then onward, so in the last 3 or so decades. Now I'll throw in a few names, a few dates, a few events, not dismissively, not in a partisan way because I am Armenian, and not analytically either, but simply, as I said, as food for thought and for research for you. So let's start in the 1980s, and let's start with February of 1988, when there was a request by the Armenians, overwhelming Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh for unification with Armenia. But also during that period, there were violent troubles in Sumgait, and some 18,000 or so Armenian refugees had to leave. I fast forward to 1991, the collapse of the USSR, and the independence of its former Soviet socialist republics. Now, what people say is that Nagorno-Karabakh was an oblast within the USSR, an autonomous region. Yes, but just keep in mind that there were 15 such oblasts in the USSR. So Nagorno-Karabakh is not the only one. Again, in 1991, some of you might be interested to read about Operation Ring, where Azerbaijan and Russia together moved against Armenians and more refugees fled from villages like Voskepar. In 1992, names that resonate with Armenians and Azerbaijanis alike are such Khojali, Marag, Marugashevan, and of course Kelbajar. Now, over the years, there have been attempts. Now, it hasn't been frozen in the sense that it started in the 1980s and nothing happened until 2020 and this violent war. No, there have been attempts by both countries and third parties to achieve a settlement. For instance, in 2011, go and check what happened when the talks were organized by Moscow, Washington, and Paris in the Russian city of Kazan. And then focus a little bit on the OSCE Minsk Group of 1992. And it has the name Minsk Group because the first meeting was meant to take place in Bishkek. And if you look at that and move forward, you would then come across in, say, 1996 with the Lisbon Summit that highlighted the real polarity in this discussion between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Territorial integrity versus self-determination. And of course, involved with the OSCE Minsk Group are a lot of countries, including Turkey, including European countries. But the three co-chairs have been Russia, USA, and France. Now, over the years, there have been many options, many ideas, proposals that have been thrown at both parties. For instance, some have said we have to do this in a one lump solution. Others have said, no, we'll do it by step approach, gradual, incremental. I suppose, hoping to increase confidence in the parties themselves to work more together. Or some have even said, let's have a confederated relationship between Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan. Or some have even talked about those corridors between Karabakh and Armenia, attaching the enclave to Armenia, and in return having another link between the exclave of Nakhichevan with Azerbaijan. All these have been thrown, but none of them have really managed to produce the solution. So what has happened over the past 3 decades is increased militarization. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan have spent enormous amounts of their budgets on military armaments, alienation, further alienation from each other, particularly with the new generations. It's a little bit like Cyprus, I think. The new generation has never lived together to know what it means a united Cyprus island. The same could be said of the enclave of Karabakh and Armenians and Azerbaijanis. That alienation has become more profound. And with alienation and with the slogans, enmity has become stronger. With Armenians, there have always been memories of the genocide of 1915 and the fear, particularly in this war, of Turkey pitching in so fully with Azerbaijan, fears and memories of what could happen to Armenians if they did not fight for their existence. Fear of pogroms, older generations, refugees who left, both Armenian refugees and Azeri refugees, who are losing hope of ever returning to their own countries, and also oil and gas in Azerbaijan. Now, all this are, just as I said, seeds, food for thought. You'll have to do your own homework. But they take me to 27th of September, when the war broke out, when eventually there were two truces that were arranged by Moscow, by Russian Federation, but never held together. Then now we are talking of further meetings in Moscow by the Azerbaijani and Armenian political leaders. We're talking about meetings in Washington, D.C. with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And we're also talking about the Armenian president going to Brussels for meetings with the NATO and EU leadership. So movements are happening. But what is the essence? What is the tug of war in this conflict? Let me give you again some headlines of things that make the quest for a solution so hard. The first one is the PIP, the principle acknowledged in public international law of self-determination. Not only Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, Kosovars, Palestinians have used this principle, have promoted this principle. Then you have the issue of refugees. What happens with those refugees? Is it repatriation? Are they all refugees, or are there internally displaced persons or IDPs as well? What about the occupied lands that surround the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh? Under international law, self-determination does not apply there. That is Azeri land occupied by Armenians. How can you give and take on those issues? Then you also have the weakness of both leaders who are unable to take their peoples with them. And of course, now Turkey is stirring the pot even further with its coercive diplomacy. We've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in the East Mediterranean, and now it is in the Southern Caucasus. That itself is a whole episode. What is coercive policy and what is Turkey's intentions behind that? That's not for me, not for now. But what I would leave you with in this very quick overview in number 3, which basically bolsters numbers 1 and 2 because they come as a trilogy, I would say the following suggestions. 1, compromise is essential to find a solution. Compromise by both leaders. We're talking about villages and 7 regions surrounding the enclave, but there needs to be Jabrail, Fizuli, others, but we need to find compromise, the spirit of compromise, which usually leads to solutions. Secondly, we need international support for a frozen conflict that has turned very volatile and hot again, and we need gradual implementation of the decisions taken. And for that to happen, you need trust. And for trust to be generated, you need to have CBMs, or confidence building measures. Add to all this, in the war that is now taking place in the Southern Caucasus, is that dreadful virus, COVID-19, which is also rearing its ugly head in a very nasty way because of the fighting, because of the proximity of people together. So all this come together gives you a lot of research work and a lot of food for thought. You can go and read books on it. You can read articles on it. You can read my university treatise on it in the law department. You can do whatever you want. I've just given you some thought. As I said, in a non-partisan manner, in a way that is not dismissive, and in a way that is not really analytical either. And let me leave you with a Latin maxim that I will translate now, or attempt to translate into English. To the brave and the faithful, nothing is impossible. I think that could be quite a useful motto for the two parties, the warring parties, and the third parties that are seemingly trying to help them in this conflict. I leave you with all this, and next week I have a surprise for you, because it will not be me talking so much as a prominent academic on conflict resolution who actually teaches a course on Nagorno-Karabakh, who will engage with me in a 15-minute discussion on the war between two peoples and two quite exclusive narratives. In the meantime, all I can say is repeat: to the brave and the faithful, nothing is impossible. Take care.